everyone, and thank you for joining us during this presentation today. My name is Philipp Woll, and I'm going to be talking about the logistics of bringing your produce to Russia and other CIS markets. But before we get started, maybe a few words about myself, or maybe answering the question why you should listen to anything I'm about to say. My name, as I said, is Philipp Woll, and I'm the general manager of a company called BTG EXPO GmbH. Our company is headquartered in Frankfurt, Germany, but we have several subsidiaries and offices in Moscow, Russia, with Russia being our core market for what we do. What we do actually is exhibition and event logistics for all kinds of industries. So whatever exhibition you can come up with in Russia, very likely you will find us there. We are the official logistics partner for big organizers like Hive, Messe Frankfurt, Deutsche Messe, or many others. As I said, what we're going to talk about today is bridging the gap, or how to actually bring your products to the markets that you want to be selling them in. I'm going to be talking about 4 topics today. The first topic is documents, the kind of documents that you need to prepare in order to make the transport and customs clearance in Russia as easy as possible. Then I'm going to be talking about a few of the very frequently required certificates that you're going to be needing. I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of import operations that we can do or that can be done in Russia in general. And at the end of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about common mistakes and how to avoid them. But before we get started, a short disclaimer. My presentation is going to focus heavily on Russia and the Russian rules and regulations. I'm doing this for 2 main reasons. One is Russia is by far the biggest market within the CIS. And the other reason is that it's also the biggest distributor country for other countries within the CIS in general, and also for the countries in the Eurasian Customs Union in particular. These countries being Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia, obviously. Another short disclaimer I want to put in here is that despite uniform customs regulations within Russia and many of these markets, regional customs authorities often interpret these regulations very different and mutually in mutually exclusive ways. Meaning that even though a rule might sound very straightforward on paper, if you go and work with different customs posts, the people there will interpret these rules differently. And last but not least, my presentation obviously is just a starting point for you and is supposed to provide a general overview. It is in no way complete or absolute. But let's get started. First thing we're going to talk about today are the transport and customs documents. The transport and customs documents are arguably the most important thing that you should worry about when you're preparing a logistics operation for Russia or any other CIS markets. Russia, you have to understand, is a country that heavily depends on import, and the federal budget of Russia heavily depends on the customs duties and taxes collected through these import operations. Therefore, the customs authorities virtually work under video surveillance most of the time. So if your documents are not in order, chances are your shipment is not going to reach its destination. But however, we can avoid all of this by making sure that these documents are in order straight from the start. And what you can contribute to this is make sure that the logistics company you work with has very, very good descriptions of the cargo that you want to send. So for food and beverages, we need easy to understand descriptions for the items that you plan on sending. We need the brand name, trademark, and obviously you as a producer, or if you're the distributor, we need the producer's name as well. We need to know which type of products you're trying to send, the main ingredients of this products, production and expiry dates. In many cases, we also need to know how the product was processed and what are the supposed storage conditions. Obviously, we need to know the quantity in exact pieces. We need to know the details of primary packaging. Let's say you have fruits and they're wrapped in plastic, so you have a plastic wrap. Or you have juice, we need to know is it in a glass bottle or if it's in a can. We need to know the gross and net weights of everything that you're sending. And obviously we need to know the product value in order to be able to determine customs duties and taxes. When it comes to alcoholic beverages, such as wine, we need to get a few more information from you. This is first of all, obviously the type of alcoholic beverage. For wine in particular, we need to know whether it's red, white, or rose wine. We need to know if it's sparkling or still. And in some cases, if your wine falls under a protected geographical indication, we also need to know that. We need to know the volume in liters for the bottles or whichever packaging your product has. We need to know the percentage of ethyl alcohol in volume percentage, the content of sugar in gram per liter, year of harvest, and for harder spirits, we also know the storage time of the spirits. So let's say you have a brandy, how long has that brandy been in a cask before you bottled it? Last but not least, we also need the date of bottling and the best before dates if available. All this information we are then going to compile into an invoice, which I'm showing you a sample for right now. And here you can see that we will go line by line, very specific. We will make sure that you're using the right BTN, the right customs code for your product. We will make sure that all the dimensions add up, the weights add up, and so forth. This is nothing that you personally have to worry about, but I just wanted to show you what all of this information is going to be used for. Moving on to frequently required certificates for import. Once again, a short disclaimer, this list is not going to be complete. I'm just mentioning some of the most frequent certificates that are required. I'm not saying that your particular shipment will need all of those, but it will certainly need some of those and might need others. But this then is down to a case-to-case inspection of what you're trying to send. But let's get started anyway. For animal-based products, we obviously need veterinary certificates. This is, I'm assuming, is just like anywhere else in the world that you're sending your cargo to, because the goods will be subject to a veterinary control upon entering the Russian Federation. Very important in this case, these goods can only be imported by companies that are actually registered with the ministries and authorized bureaucracy in Russia. So that means you cannot simply send a product to any company there is in Russia. This company, prior to receiving these goods, has to be registered. And they have to be in several lists. I put one here, so if the company is registered but still not in the list, it will not work. So you have to make sure that the company has all the necessary registrations and certifications prior to receiving the cargo. Also important, customs authorities only accept originals of the veterinary certificates. You cannot just attach a copy, you have to send the original. For plant-based products, we need phytosanitary certificates in the standard international format. And as you know, you have to list the products in detail with the botanical names in Latin letters. And there have some phrases have to be included, which I didn't put here because it was just be too much for the scope of this presentation. But if you're working with a forwarder, they will tell you precisely which sentences have to be included in your certificate. Once again, only originals are going to be accepted by the customs authorities. Another one that is special to the Eurasian Customs Union is a sanitary certificate. There is a rule that all kinds of food products in circulation within Russia and the Customs Union member states must be accompanied by a document that says on the company's letterhead that produced this product that the product is safe for human consumption and that it complies with all the sanitary, epidemiological, and hygienic requirements of the Customs Union. There's more information that has to be included in this sanitary certificate, but some of the most prominent ones are the use of GMO, whether you've used any GMO or whether there is any GMO in the product. If yes, that has to be mentioned. If some pesticides were used in growing the produce, you also have to mention that. And once again, only originals, and it has to be on the letterhead of the manufacturer, stamped, signed, and all the other shenanigans. Last but not least, I want to talk about the declaration of conformity. This is a very, very big topic, and I'm making it very simple here. As you can imagine, Russia, the CIS countries, like all other countries, have a very strict and rigid certification system in place for all kinds of products. So this doesn't just apply for foods and beverages, but this is for technical gadgets, machinery, you name it. Different standards. Some of you might be familiar with German TÜV. It's basically the same thing, just the Russian/CIS version of this. In order to get a declaration of conformity that is to the Russian rules and regulations, technical requirements, you have to send samples to an authorized laboratory in Russia or any other member state. The laboratory will then test your product and determine whether it actually meets the requirements. If so, your product will be registered as free for sale usually for a time frame of roughly 3 years. Can be longer, can be shorter, but it depends on your product and the procedure that you're applying for. Once you're registered in there, your company or your product in that case, because the registration is always for specific products, is good to go. All right, so let's talk about the different kinds of import operations that can be done in Russia or any other Eurasian Economic Zone member state. First of all, we're going to talk about temporary imports. Temporary imports, you might wonder, why do I care about temporary imports? I plan on exporting my products and I want to sell them and not get them back eventually. Yes, true, but you also might want to participate in exhibition and events to promote your product in Russia or any of the other member states. If you do so, very likely you're going to have stuff that cannot be permanently imported in the context of an exhibition and event. One prime example of this might be a pop-up stand, you know, these posters that you have. Unfortunately, you cannot just leave this there. If you import it in the context of an exhibition event, you have to take it back. So there you have your temporary import. With the simplified procedure that applies for exhibition and events, you have a few, let's say, less requirements to conduct the import operation. Unfortunately, you cannot, after the show, turn the product into a permanent import because you've used that simplified procedure. But on the other hand, you do not need to pay a certain duties, taxes, or whatsoever, because everybody knows this is just in the country for the exhibition and will leave straight thereafter. Within the simplified procedure, you can leave the product in Russia for a maximum of 1 year. The standard procedure requires you to pay some part of customs duties and taxes, but we're not going to talk about this here because I don't think that this is applicable for most of you. Standard procedures would be for, let's say, drilling equipment that you send to Russia for a specific period, let's say a year or two, in order to find, explore a new mine or whatever, and you just need that drilling equipment for this period of time. This would be a standard procedure. But moving on to permanent imports, once again, we have a divide between a simplified procedure and a standard procedure. Within the simplified procedure, once again, this is for exhibitions and events, you have the right and the chance to import catalogs, giveaways, small product samples, and all such things without requiring a Russian buyer, which is very important because within the standard procedure, you always need a Russian buyer, which you might not have if you're going into Russia for the first time. However, the list of eligible goods is very limited. Even product samples can easily become a problem. So in this case, it's very important that you work closely with your forwarder to determine what's okay to send and what cannot be sent within the simplified procedure. The customs duties and taxes must still be paid in full. However, you can forego some of the certificates and licenses if you're using the simplified procedure. The standard procedure, on the other hand, this is when we're talking about actual commercial imports into Russia. So we're not talking about a few product samples, but we are talking about a full container full of fruits, wines, etc. Then you're talking about a standard permanent import that is meant for sale within the customs union's territory. As I previously said, commercial cargo always requires a Russian buyer, and this Russian buyer cannot be a private person. It must be a Russian legal entity, meaning a Russian company. Required documents for the permanent import are a sales contract, and the sales contract has to be very specific. It has to hold up to certain standards, and it has to mention a price. The price is important because during the permanent importation, the customs authority will ask you to prove or will ask the importer to prove that he actually paid the money or the price that is stated within that sales contract. You need the specifications of the cargo, obviously, like we talked about in the beginning when we were talking about the invoices and all the information that goes in there. This we will need, and we will need all the applicable license and certificates. Customs duties and taxes obviously must be paid in full for commercial cargo. Last but not least, talking about import operations, I want to give a short outlook on excise imports because I know that a lot of you want to export wine to Russia and other member states, and wine or all excise goods in general are slightly different than regular permanent or temporary imports. For wine, once again, though, we have a simplified procedure and we have a standard procedure. You can use the simplified procedure if you are sending wine to Russia in order to get certification for future proper commercial exports, or if you're just sending samples to Russia in order to find buyers at exhibitions and events. Within this simplified procedure, there's one very, very important rule, and that rule is that you can send a maximum of 5 bottles or 5 whatever units of packaging it is you have per kind and vintage. So that means you have a red, a rosé, and a white, 5 bottles of each. But 15 bottles might not be much, so you can mix up the vintages as well. So you can have a red from 2016, a red from 2015, and 2014, and you can have 5 bottles of each of those. So once again, this is something you might want to discuss with your forwarder ahead of time to make sure you're able to send what you do want to send. For this simplified procedure, we only need the detailed performer invoices. That means all the information that we talked about in the beginning and no additional certificates. Alternatively, and this is something that is very common that we do a lot, is if you want to get around this 5 bottle restrictions, there's also the chance to declare all of the goods as diplomatic cargo. This obviously requires the support of your embassy within Russia, because the embassy basically is going to say that this is an event under the patronage of the embassy, and the embassy imports all of these samples in their name. In this case, you do not have limitations whatsoever. You don't have customs duties and taxes. You're free to send whatever you want. However, you really do need the support of the embassy. Without the embassy, this unfortunately is not possible. The standard procedure is what we need to look at when it comes to the commercial import of wine. So you've participated in an exhibition and event, you found a buyer, and now you're not sending 5, 10, or 15 bottles, but you're sending 500, 5,000, however many bottles you want to send. Difficult process, as you can imagine, and as it is in most other countries, because we're talking about excise goods. So for excise goods, if you want to send commercial wine shipments to Russia, you always need a Russian buyer, which once again needs to be a Russian legal entity. And in addition to being a legal entity, it also needs to be a licensed legal entity. So this company cannot just be an importer of fruits, candy, whatever, and then decide, oh, I also want to sell some wine. No, they have to apply for all the necessary licenses in advance. And only if they are licensed, they can actually import the goods in their name. Before this can be done, you have to send some samples to an authorized laboratory in the Russian Federation, which will then test your wine and determine whether it complies with the requirements of the Russian Federation. If they determine that, yes, your product is good to go, it's safe for human consumption and fulfills all other criteria, you will receive certification. The importer that you're working with can then buy the excise stamps within Russia. And I believe right now, if we're talking about wine, it is around 33 rubles per liter of wine. 33 rubles in euros is 30 cents, 40 cents roughly. But this obviously changes and also depends on the alcohol percentage of volume that you have in your wine. So you have to check on a case-to-case basis. But once the importer has these excise stamps, they will then send them to you, because you have to apply these excise stamps on the bottles before they're shipped to Russia. So he will supply you with these stamps, and he will also supply you, or he should be supplying you, with detailed instructions of how they should be applied. Once all of this is done and the goods have reached Russia, the importer must register the imported goods in a unified state automated information system. I know that's a mouthful, but the system also is quite sophisticated. Basically, what it means is that every single import, every bottle of imported alcohol in Russia is registered within this system. And when these bottles end up in a shop and are being sold, when they're sold, the cashier scans a barcode on the bottle, and the system automatically makes sure that this bottle has been imported in a proper way. So very, very sophisticated. That's why this is needed for. Basically, it's just a Russian company or Russian government making sure that nobody skips out on the taxes and excise duties. For transport and customs document requirements, we have, on top of what I've already mentioned, everything that we have with other permanent commercial imports in general. Last but not least, I want to quickly talk about common mistakes, stuff that we see on a regular basis and stuff that can have severe consequences, but also can be easily avoided. So I want to address this here and hopefully make your life a little bit easier. First off, using courier services. Don't ever use a courier service for exhibition shipments or for samples that you want to send to Russia. Courier services can neither conduct temporary customs clearance nor permanent customs clearance for exhibition goods. So what usually happens is your courier shipment reaches a distribution center, gets stuck there, and the actual recipient of the shipment will simply get a letter: we've received this, but we cannot clear it. Will you pay for the return of this shipment, or should we destroy it? So avoid this, don't do it, it never works out. Another common mistake we often see is that temporary imports are given away or are lost during an exhibition event. Please, please do your best to avoid this, because especially if we talk about very cheap items like a pop-up stand or something like this, people don't think this is something serious, but the Russian customs authorities do take this very, very serious. So if you lose or if you give away something that should have left the country after the show, you are in for a world of pain, in penalties, in complications, time lost. Just avoid it if you can. Another thing that we often see is that confirmed invoices are changed in the last minute without discussing the matter with the forwarder. So this is, let's say you've already prepared everything, last minute, your marketing manager comes in and says, but listen, we have to also put, I don't know, 20 more of these new brochures into the box. Don't do it without talking to your forwarder, because at the end of the day, there is a good chance that this box is going to be opened by customs when they find these 20 catalogs that you've put in addition to what's already declared. Neither those 20 nor the rest of your shipment will reach its destination. Also, what we often see is that cargo isn't packed according to the final packing list. So let's say you've prepared everything perfectly, but then you give the order down to your warehouse and somebody else that doesn't know about the requirements of Russia starts packing there. He sees there's some empty space left in a particular box and decides to fill that box. Very bad. Don't do it, because we really need to make sure that the documents harmonize with what is in the packages. Another thing is, within the documents, we always have to declare the amount of packages. So let's say we have a packing list that says we are sending 5 cartons, but then someone in your warehouse takes these 5 cartons and straps them on a pallet. Once of a sudden, 5 cartons become 1 pallet. And once again, the documents don't correspond with the reality of the shipment, and we have a problem. Last but not least, this is something that has gotten better in recent years, but still sometimes is a problem. And that is that packaging is not suitable for Russian roads and the climate. So you're right now in spring, moving into summer. You might not even think about the conditions in Russia when your package arrives there, because you're walking around in shorts and you're having a great time. But when your cargo arrives, it might very well be minus 25, and your cargo is taken from a plane and sitting there for hours. So those bottles of wine might freeze, might explode, and there goes your shipment. So this is also something that you should keep in mind when you're preparing for entering a market and a rough climate like Russia. Okay, this is everything that I've wanted to bring across today, and I will be happy to take your questions now.